Hi, thanks for watching. I'd like to read you a story, and this is the key character in the story. His name is William Paterson, and he was the founder of the colony near the Isthmus of Panama in 1698. 4 years before it, this guy was one of the co-founders of the Bank of England. Right? And here he is again. See, these guys never had long hair. They probably had more wigs than Cher would use in a Vegas show. But anyway, right, so he was one of the founders of the Bank of England, and he proposed a loan of 1.2 million to the government. Right, so he was quite an important guy. So let's see what happened here. In the early 1600s, Scotland had been trading with Asia and Africa. During this time of harsh economic rivalry in Europe, England thought the Scots were getting a bit too wealthy. They slapped down the 1660 Navigation Act. This required that all goods to and from England, or any English possession or territory in Asia, Africa, or the Americas, must be transported in English ships sailed by an English captain with a crew of at least 75% Englishmen. This stripped the Scots of their economic independence and led to increased dependence on England. Infuriated, a Scot named William Paterson eventually found a loophole. They were not prevented from establishing their own colonies. Paterson quickly set up a company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies, also called the Scottish Darien Company. Paterson's Darien scheme targeted the Isthmus of Panama on the Gulf of Darien. His ambitions first involved setting up a colony they would call Caledonia, symbolic because this was the part of Scotland the Romans could never conquer. Then he planned to establish a trading post that would connect the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Had he been successful, the new colony of Caledonia may have proved to be an extremely lucrative empire. Right, so his idea was quite simple and brilliant. Ships would leave Europe, travel across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, arrive here where the cargo would be unloaded, portaged across the Isthmus of Panama, then loaded onto ships and taken to the Indies, and also saved the treacherous journey around the Cape of Good Hope, around the tip of Africa. So let's see what happened. Right. Raising capital for the Darien scheme was not a problem. Many English and Scots wanted to reap the reward of the import-export business was then yielding. Unfortunately for Scotland, King Bully of England reacted to parliamentary pressure by publicly denouncing the Company of Scotland, which caused the English investors to take back their monies. The company had to rely on Scottish investors, who came up with a huge sum of money, £400,000 sterling, This is impressive when one considers that Scotland was already wounded by years of wars and famines. The seed money supposedly equalled a fifth of Scotland's capital, and even commoners cleared out their life savings because they believed wholeheartedly in the purpose of the venture, and what would it mean for Scotland should it succeed. So, 1,200 passengers full of hope, all of whom were promised houses and acres of good farmland, sailed in 5 ships that left Leith near Edinburgh in 1698. William Paterson, his wife and child were also on this expedition. 40 passengers died of illness between Scotland and Darien. After a 4-month journey, they arrived in Panama on November 2nd, and within 2 months, 32 more people died. Soon after, it became apparent that life was going to be very different than they had expected. The Darien project immediately incited European countries. England forbid anyone under their power to trade with or assist Caledonia in any way. This meant that the colonists could not obtain any provisions from the English islands in the area, including Jamaica. Agriculture also proved to be difficult and required time and energy, both of which the Scots were short on since they were starving and dying of illness. Instead of establishing farms, the Caledonians had to resort to setting up a rickety town that they christened New Edinburgh. They also built a fort called Fort St. Andrew. Now, the Darien colony needed local grown items to plant and eat. They sought to trade with the native Kuna Indians, who inhabited the Darien region. However, the colonists discovered that nobody living in a hot and humid area of swamp needed what they had brought to trade, primarily heavy woolen fabrics and combs. A failed attempt to get more money and emigres from Scotland compounded the tragedies, and to make matters worse, Spain held claim to the area, although they had no presence of settlement there. The Spanish began to take military action against the settlers to keep their domain. Right? Although the Kuna despised the Spaniards for their aggression and intent to oppress the Kuna, the indigenous people liked the Scots. They bought plantains and fruit to the Darien colony, but most of that food went to leaders and sailors living aboard the protected ships. It wasn't enough to feed the ailing colony. Now, this is a quote from a Kuna elder, apparently. In the time of our forefathers, white people came here, Scottish and Spanish people. We liked the Scottish more than the Spanish, for the Spanish attacked us and drove us inland away from the coast, and the Scots did not. But there were battles, and many ships were sunk. So, in the heat of June 1699, only 7 months after setting foot in Darien, a vote was taken, and it was agreed that the Scots of New Edinburgh would abandon Darien. The remaining colonists would sail to New England. A second fleet from Scotland sailed in 1699, not knowing that the colony had already been attacked and burned to the ground by the Spanish, and abandoned by its few survivors. Now, although the new Darien colony attempted to rebuild the forts and huts, the morale was low and the Spanish were threatening. The Kuna and Scots cooperated in skirmishes against the Spanish, routed them at the Battle of to Bacante, but the colonists had no military support, and hence the second Scottish settlement at Darien was besieged by the Spanish. The few settlers who survived went back to Scotland in 1700. William Paterson also returned alone, as his wife and child had perished in Darien. Ultimately, he became a strong proponent of the Treaty of Union and fought for its cause. Ultimately, 2,000 people died in the venture, and there was no return on the huge investment. All seemed lost. Left with seemingly no choice, Scotland signed the Treaty of Union of the two kingdoms of Scotland and England. This was a momentous event in history that effectively destroyed most autonomies that Scotland had previously enjoyed. After the Darien affair, many Europeans felt as though the colonists had brought shame and disgrace to Scotland. Adding fuel to the fire, rumours circulated that bribes had influenced members of the Parliament of Scotland who voted for the Union. Indeed, many public and private investors fell into financial ruin, and England sweetened the deal by agreeing to pay Scotland a fair sum of money as compensation for the Darien failure if Scotland ratified the Union. Even today, much of the current literature regarding the Darien failure condemns the leaders of the expedition for poor planning and choices. The understandable bitterness and anger are still palpable in Scotland. And here's the Scottish folk song, which was written by Robbie Burns, and it was called Such a Parcel of Rogues in a Nation. Right, so there were many factors that led to the outcome of the Darien scheme. Many people feel they were more than merely a withdrawal of support for the Scots at the time. Did the powers that should not be deliberately undermine Scotland's chance for economic independence? Had it not been for the denial of support, perhaps a lack of proper provisions such as food and tradable goods could have been remedied with the assistance of nearby colonies. Maybe, with proper military backing for the colonists, the Spaniards, already dealing with their own plagues, would have decided that Darien wasn't worth the trouble. In the years following the Darien affair, the Spanish made many attempts to settle the region. However, constant opposition by the Kuna made it ultimately impossible. In the end, the bold ideas that fueled the Darien scheme eventually led to the building of the Panama Canal. The passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean would open up a whole new world for international maritime commerce. Today, somewhere around 1 million vessels have safely passed through the canal. Well, I've got a wee bit to add to that, because they never built the Panama Canal. They took out all the mud. It was already there. Right. Thanks for watching. Well, listening. Please comment,